Yeah, come on. Good afternoon. Welcome. Thank you for joining us for the Artist Encounter for Venus in Fur. My name is Adam Belcour. I'm a casting director and associate producer here at Goodman, and we're thrilled that you could join us for this conversation. A couple of things before we get started. I'd like to acknowledge the people that help make the production and these events around the production possible, and those are our sponsors. And for Venus in Fur, the major corporate sponsor is the Cotton Munchin Rosenman, as well as the corporate sponsor partner, which is United Scrap Metal. We also have additional support provided by the season and production sponsors and the Endowing Excellence Campaign donors. So thank you to them for all of their support. I'm thrilled to introduce an incredible group of women artists and thinkers, and I will turn it over. You do have a program that has bios on it, so we're not going to spend a lot of time introducing these amazing women, but I did want to draw your attention to that so you can look at their credits there. And I will turn it over to Megan Carney, as well as director Joanie Schultz, director of the production, and Koya Paz. Enjoy.
Thank you, Adam. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Nice to have you here. Thanks so much for joining us. We wanted to start actually by asking who has already seen the play and who's on their way to see the play. Who's seen the play already? Anyone who's here?
Wow. Wow.
On your way to see the play? Okay, that's good. No spoilers.
Yeah.
Then we want to make sure we stop before we say anything that's going to give away too much of what's going on, what you're about to experience. We're thrilled to be sitting here with you, Joanie, and we really want to center this conversation around the production here at the Goodman and Joanie's experience of working with the team and cracking open this play. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if you want to kick us off setting up a little bit of context of kind of the synopsis of what are the worlds of the play, what is that kind of the brief overview, and then I have a couple of questions to kick us off.
Sure, my pleasure. So Venus in Fur by David Ives is a play about a man who has adapted this book called Venus in Furs by Leopold von Sacher-Masoch, which is a book from 1870, and it is a book about a man who is so taken with a particular woman that he asks her to enslave him. And the word masochism is actually named after Sacher-Masoch because of this book. And so Thomas Novacek, a contemporary playwright, has adapted this book into a play, and he has been having auditions all day for a young woman to play the leading role in his version of Sacher-Masoch's work. And he is upset on the phone with his fiancée when the play starts, and he has not found anyone who could play the part in the way that he envisions. And then knock, 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 a young woman enters, and she doesn't seem to be exactly what he's looking for, but she doesn't, she ends up being a lot more than what she seems at first. So they, because he's the only one left there, it's the end of the day, they end up reading the play together, and their relationship and their dynamic changes as they go through the play. Yeah, it's basically
a lot of layers, a lot of complications. Mm-hmm. The characters are revealed and transformed in all these different ways. That's a perfect setup. And I wonder if you could kick off our discussion by talking to us a little bit about when you were first presented with this project and you first read the play. What were the things that drew you to it? That kind of that initial spark as a director that you thought, yes, I wanna work on this.
Yeah, I was really surprised by the play. I'd heard of it. It was a big hit in New York. The actress in particular who played the role there was had gotten quite a name for herself. But I hadn't read it myself, and then Robert Falls, the artistic director here at the Goodman, gave me the play over lunch, and he said, we're thinking about doing this. I'm not sure if we're going to do it, but I think if we do, I think a woman should direct it. And I was like, that's really interesting, knowing that it hadn't been a woman who directed it on Broadway. And so I went out to get a cup of coffee, and I thought I'd start reading the play, and I thought I'd just read a little of it because I had somewhere else to go that day. And I ended up not being able to put it down. I was really surprised by the levels of complexity in it. And I was also really surprised by how much it just kept me wrapped with attention. I think it's very suspenseful, the play, and that there was a lot of mystery in it, and I just had to get to the end. And when I finished reading it, I thought, oh gosh, I really do need to direct this play. I think it being a play about theater, there's a certain way in which I already felt this in. Although I have to be honest, I'm not usually a huge fan of plays that are about theater because I feel like they're often a little too self-involved for an audience that you hope to be reaching that's not in the theater. But there was something really I felt accessible about it at the same time, and something that in its like large theatricalized version of what we do, because it certainly isn't very realistic. I mean, it has aspects of realism to it, but I think that it talked about some issues that I have in the theater all the time, and that I have as a person that I wanted to bring to an audience. So, for instance, Thomas Novacek is a director who is at a really frustrated point in his career, I think, and he's been sort of grappling with some issues of feeling misunderstood, and I think that as a director I've had that issue, and Vanda, the young actress who comes through the door, is someone who is, I think, often underestimated, and having spent most of my career as a young female director, I feel like I had very much access to that experience of what it meant to be underestimated when I walk into a room. And so watching these two people that I understood really both of grapple with each other and grapple with the power dynamics of an audition process, which we'll talk about, I'm sure, which is always really complicated for me. There was just so much going on there that I wasn't even expecting.
Yeah, that's great. I feel like the setting of it in that moment of the audition is so fraught with tensions and expectations. You know, we've got this director adapter who has been like sitting up late, like writing into the night, imagining the perfect person to embody this role that he's created, you know, and then we meet him when he's seen dozens of women parade through the audition. None of them are right, you know, and he's all the reasons why they're wrong. And that sort of outsized expectation that a single person will fulfill the fantasy, right, is where the layering of the worlds really begins. And it also really got me thinking about, and then I want to open this up and kind of talk about auditions and that the room where that happens. It got me thinking about, for actors, you know, what are those expectations we put on performers in the business, you know, that we see in this play, but also in the businesses you're referring to kind of empty themselves and become whatever is needed to create this play, you know, and when we get to watch that performance, we see the results of all that hard work and that personal transformation that happens. What is required to do that in the moment? What are actors expected to leave outside the room, you know, to drop at the door as they come in for an audition, to be able to become whatever it will be to achieve this fantasy that the director might be holding, you know? I wonder if we could kind of talk about that.
Yeah,
what are you thinking,
you know,
Chloe?
but one of the things I was thinking about is, yes, the play is about theater, and I think that part of what's exciting is audiences get or feel like they're getting a peek into it, but the reality is that although the audition is a heightened place for those kinds of expectations, the reality is that everybody is performing all the time. We're very familiar with this dynamic of trying to figure out, what does my boss need from me right now? What does my child need from me right now? What does this person that I'm trying to go on a date with want me to be? You know, and so the audition becomes kind of very literally a theatricalized space for that. But I think that part of why audiences relate to this play so much, we were talking about how it's that play that is being performed, you know, everyone wants to do it and everyone wants to see it because we relate to that. We relate to trying to figure out who someone wants us to be, how we can be that when we are letting go of actually being ourselves in the service of what someone wants. And we can also relate to the other side of that, of really, really wanting someone to be somebody that maybe they are not entirely.
Well, and I think that's really interesting you say the thing about how we perform in our real lives, because I think that when Vanda walks in this room, it's not just the performance that she's about to give as Dunayev that's important. It's her performance of her performance of being an actress, right, which is also like, I'm going to be here for you and really open for you. But it's also her performance of gender. Like, it's her performance of being a woman and being this, like, young woman, and what she has actually been, I think what's happened to her in her life. I actually got really sad about this one day because I realized she when she comes in the room, she doesn't own up to the fact that she's read the book. And I was like, here is a woman who has actually been taught and rewarded for not having read the book. And so that's not what she walks in with. She walks in with, like, I don't really know. And because that's what she's rewarded for. And I became, like, quite overcome one day on my way to rehearsal, like, oh, that's so sad. But it's also just so true. It's so honestly true. That level of performance as well. Mm.
Is there anything you want to share with us about the audition process for this? You mentioned in another interview that it was a surreal experience to audition people for a play that was an audition. Can you talk to us about how did you grapple with your own ideas about who these people should be and what you were looking for, and kind of get ready for that room?
It was really hard. It was the hardest audition process. I think part of it actually has to do with it being two people, right? So you've got two people on stage the entire time. So it puts a lot of import on who both of those people are. Not that it's not ever important, but something about that felt very tense. And the other thing is that, it was like this audition process of auditioning people who are auditioning. So it just felt very meta all the time. And Thomas comments at the beginning of the play, he's making fun of these women for bringing in props and costumes, but Vanda brings in some props and costumes, and almost every actress I saw brought in some props and costumes because they kind of needed to do that in order to really embody this role, which I just thought was just sort of a bizarre experience. The other thing that, also, like, this was my first show on the main stage at the Goodman Theatre, and the expectations of, like, we opened up the casting process to New York and Chicago, and looking at some people in LA too, just to look for, like, the best people in the nation, which was already, like, a new thing for me. But when I got casting director Adam Belcourt to look up our stats at last look, he pulled up, I think it was like 94 actresses that we considered to play Vanda. And, we didn't see all of those people. We just considered 94 people. And, but we saw a lot of them. And it was really hard. It's an incredibly difficult role to cast. You guys will all see later today that it's a very multifaceted role. But the other things that I was having to sort of grapple with the whole time was, like, yes, there are women sort of showing up and taking off their clothes in front of me because that is what Vanda does in the play. And then how am I judging that, and what am I judging? And there was just a lot of conversations that we had about the sensitivity of that, and what does it mean to be looking for somebody who's, like, sexy, and what does that even look like, which is actually way more like a state of mind than a state of body, actually. Like, people who are just really comfortable with themselves, and then how does that manifest? And then it just sort of felt I don't know, there were a lot of days that I felt sort of horrible and dirty. When it came down to it, Amanda Drinkall, who was cast in the role, was the first person I ever saw read for the role, and she was amazing. And something just didn't jive in the callback. As she says, she tells me now, I thought I might actually get the role, and I freaked out. And then we went and saw all these other people. We went to New York, and we came back, and then Adam brought her back in and was like, look at her again. And then I did some stuff with her, and she was great, but I was like, is she sexy? I'm not sure. And we actually had to ask her to dress a little differently for the last audition, and I felt really terrible about that. And I was like, okay, well, I guess there's a little Thomas Nowacek in all of us.
But that's so great to hear, that because the play is so much about power and those dynamics, and it's very easy to gender those dynamics, and then to think about being a female director and a young woman yourself, having to kind of grapple with what all of that means, I think is much more interesting than if you're like, it was such a sensitive space, happy feelings.
Yeah, I can sort of get away with it a little bit better. Yeah, I guess that's true. That's true. Although I was on the other hand, I was very clear when I met Rufus that he was the guy for it. Like, it was just like, oh yeah, you are him. That's it. done. So that was interesting too, just to think about how that works.
And, you know, I'm thinking about one of the first lines that she says when he says, "Oh, you're not right for it," you know, in the play, and she's like, "Oh, I'm too tall, I'm too short, I'm too thin, I'm too fat, I'm too this, I'm too young, too old," whatever, the whole list of things, you know. How that's it's that 30-second, it's that first impression, you know. So it's that first impression of the meeting, and you talked about that. We all encounter that in our lives. But then there's also this really layered process that we see in the play, but you also experienced of, well, are you also this? Are you also this? Can you bring this? Can you bring that? And you need to spend some time together. You need to spend some time with a person to understand if that's going to be the right fit for all of those pieces, right?
And having been, did either of you start as actresses?
Yes.
Yeah, so we are all directors. So, you know, I remember so vividly, and watching the play brought this back for me, being a young woman and feeling, one, that in order to get work I had to be super skinny and toned, which is not my natural state. I like to spend a lot of time on the sofa. And two, you know, just the kind, you know, I think the day I decided to quit acting was when my agent was sending me to audition for something. I was like, "Can you wear a wetsuit?" And I was like, "Well, I don't own a wetsuit." You know, I was like, "Well, then go in your bathing suit or your bikini." And I was like, I have had it with this business. I am going to be a director. It wasn't quite that line, but to finally come on the other side and say, you know, I get to make some decisions finally, instead of having decisions be made about me. Because as an actress, your only power is in figuring out, what does the director mean by dress differently for this audition? You know, what would it mean to be sexier right now? Whereas as the director, your power is in getting to say, I'm going to need to see something different right now.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I remember being I had some horrible audition stories that we can talk about later, where I had directors ask me to do crazy things, and I ended up like making out with people and going home and crying and being like, "Why is it being an actress so hard?" Because I often felt like I was having to give away some of my power, and I think that some of the best actresses I know are the ones who don't give away any power in that situation, who do actually find a way to take an audition situation or a situation like that and become empowered in it and kind of take it over and flip it, which I think also happens a lot in this play. Like the power flips many, many times. Who's really in control of this room and what's happening in it is constantly, you kind of don't know who that really is. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point about the, you talked a little bit earlier when we were getting ready to come in about who wins the play, you know, like, is there a winner in the outcome? And you can all decide after you see it who you think wins, but setting up someone who can dominate and submit and take charge and then lower status and really play the games of it, you know, and finding two people then that do that really well together is part of the trick. So it sounds like the audition, this extended audition process full of a roller coaster ride of a lot of different options. And I wonder, Joanie, if you want to tell us what were some of the challenges besides that? Like once you got into the script and you found your people, you know, and you start your rehearsal process and you're really diving in, what challenges did you come up against with this play, this page turner, you know, that you really wanted, and then it's like full of these arguments, you know, and these really difficult moments where you had to make a lot of choices, you know?
Yeah.
Do you want to talk to us about those landmarks for you?
Well, we spent a lot of time at the table picking those apart, and we actually one of the things that we did that I was surprised that we did, but when it came up, I was like, oh yeah, of course we're going to do this, which is Thomas Novacek's play. We took out of the other play, and our literary staff did a really nice job just pulling that play out of the other one, and we studied it. So that the actors felt like they had a real handle. I said, let's approach this play like we're doing this play. Like, I'm directing this play now with the two of you in it. And that taught us a lot about that play, because the thing is that you go back and forth a lot in the play between the play within the play and the play that's outside of it. And there's a way in which the two plays end up working really well together, but without studying that one separately, we weren't really getting anywhere with it. So that was a really, really interesting, it actually took like a really long time to get through that, because there's a lot of words in that play. It's very dense, and all of us had read the book, and so picking that apart was really important. Also, we just worked really hard, like moment by moment, and figuring out what each moment was and how things turned and changed. One of the other things that just occurred to me that's kind of interesting about our process is that we brought in a young woman who is a dominatrix and a sexual educator to talk to us. And her talk with us was actually like even more helpful than I ever believed it would be, in that we talked a lot about power dynamics and power sharing, and how submission and domination, like how they actually work together to create sort of this, what is like a beautiful sharing of power. And she had all these really lovely ways of putting it, and all these ways of looking at submission without at it not being a state of weakness. But she said, especially when men want to be submissive, that there's a way in which it's often looked at as weak. But if you look at things like the military, those men are like really strong and really submissive. They're there to take orders. And yet they're like the strongest archetype of man you can think of. And so all of these things kind of really combined to get us on our feet. And then it was just a lot of step-by-step process of the two actors really trusting each other and being able to play well with each other and caring about each other enough that they can actually, like, I don't know, do some slightly mean things to each other sometimes, and kind of like have this space and this energy between them. But at the same time, I think David Ives has crafted it extremely well. Like all the points are really embedded in the text. So, I spent a long time doing some like serious text analysis on this play, and I mean, it's almost foolproof in the way that he writes those changes in, and the way in which we found them in the exact spots he wanted us to. I think he's written a really remarkable play here. I think it's one of the reasons it's being done everywhere is he's written and adapted a lot of plays, but this one is pretty genius in some of the things he lifts out of the book and the way he deals with the characters and the comedy. But
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like what you're saying about sharing power, you know, and the way that's negotiated in the play, and there are these really beautiful moments of kind of asking for things and receiving them or not, the sort of denial of something you ask for, or the giving of something that happens in all of these layered ways throughout. And there's an exchange of power, this negotiated agreement going on constantly. Are we staying here? Are we going? Am I staying in the room? Am I leaving? Who am I now? Who are you? And what role are you going to play now? Is layered so beautifully with the two actors.
And again, I think it goes back to also that the power dynamic, if you can even call it that, between actor and director, which is, a director might be in charge but can't do anything without the actors there. And the actors are the people who really make the play come to life. We just watch.
Yeah, and I think anyone who's been a director also really feels the actor power sometimes, because if an actor is in a bad mood or irritated with you, they'll let you know that in ways that can be really counterproductive, And so, yeah, we always think about the directors having all the power, but that's not always the case. People find ways to assert what they want and what they need, in general, and in the play and in the rehearsal room.
Yeah.
I think too the moments of where they take turns directing, where the person who's the actress also then starts doing some staging, I mean, it works in a lot of different ways in here. Were there any moments in the script that you saw and you just really struggled with, that you sort of kind of had to wrestle with to figure out, how do I interpret this in a way that works for me now, works with this team now? Were there any real puzzles for you in it?
Well, I think the biggest puzzle to me that I think Rufus was actually really good at helping me figure out was, do I want to talk about this? It's kind of near the end. I don't know if I want to talk about it.
Okay.
Oh, let me see if I can think of something different. Oh, ask me something different.
We are so worried about not giving you guys spoilers because the whole play is, as you've mentioned, a page turner. I mean, it really switches up all of the time in ways that are very confusing to unpack, but also so delightful as an audience. So we had a lot of talk before this started about making sure we don't ruin the fun for you guys in experiencing that.
Yeah, I just had to stop myself. That's really funny.
Fair enough. Yeah.
It's like being the director of Divergent or something. You know, like no spoilers.
Yeah. I'll see if I can think of something else.
I'll take us off. I'll take us off to another track. About, you had mentioned something about, the comedy of it. I mean, David Ives is known as a very hilarious playwright, you know?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of comedy in this play. So we're talking about the give and take and S&M and power dynamics and all of it. And it's also moments of total hilarity, you know? And so there's something, comedy's hard in the theater, right? Building to the laugh, finding the right moment, finding that brevity, the lightness of tone that really fits the material. And so I wonder, you want to talk about that a little bit, or even your experience, you know, as we were watching it, like what our thoughts around that balance, you know, of building to the funny with this play, like letting the characters, letting that humor and the sort of effusive life of these two people come through in it.
Yeah, I think comedy is super hard. There are places in the script that I knew people were going to laugh, and there are places in the script I had no idea people were going to laugh. And then there's the problem in the room, which is I'm not laughing at anything, right? So you end up making this play in kind of a void. It's not until previews, when an audience comes, that you really start to understand, like, oh, this actually is funny. Oh, phew, that's funny. Great. I'm so glad we have the funny, because I feel like a lot of it has to do with timing, right? David Ives is very famous for this group of plays he wrote called All in the Timing. It is all in the timing, and there's a way in which I feel like my ear is kind of tuned to that timing. So I know, like, oh, if you emphasize that word, people will find it funny, and then they'll do it, and I'm like, great, that's funny. And they have to kind of trust that my yeah, that's funny response is actually funny. I don't know what your experiences are, like, directing comedies, but in the rehearsal room, if they're really funny in the rehearsal room, then that's usually kind of scary to me, that, like, that means the audience won't find them as funny.
The worry is, like, the funny gets used up. You know, because it is so much about timing and this sort of delight in surprising each other. And I think the challenge in rehearsing that is that you don't want to lose the freshness of that. So it just we've all had the experience of seeing comedy that just feels stale. It was hopefully funny at one time, you know. And in this play, it really needs to be funny. That's what makes everything that happens okay to watch in a lot of, you know, I think you could have a very different play that dealt with these sort of subject matters that wouldn't have the same kind of joy. And, you know, when I was watching it, the whole audience was kind of leaning forward. I have seen very few plays where the audience was so fully invested in what was happening in this very audible way. And I think it's because it's funny. People don't feel that they have to close themselves off to what's happening.
Yeah.
But then there's some really beautiful moments. I don't think it's a spoiler. The actress gets mad at one point, and you see her just in this, you let her be in this long moment of just being really mad and trying to decide what she's going to do next, and then moves forward. And I loved watching it because the play hadn't yet done that. And it was such a surprise in this really great way.
Oh, that's great. That's great to hear. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I do think, having done a lot of research for this play about sadomasochism, there's a lot of material out there that's just plain weird and uncomfortable. And I do think that the humor of it does make it much more palatable than, like, the weird German movies I watched adapted from this book.
Right. Your research.
My research movies.
Right, and what it invites us to stay with it and also, I think, see ourselves in it, right? To not distance and not say, oh, this is some kink world. Like, this is something not connected to me, but something we can say, oh, I'm understanding these characters. I'm looking at this. I recognize that. Oh, okay, where else am I in this? You know,
Right.
so it invites more of a conversation.
It doesn't parody it in any way, so it's not
Or
a kind of
judge it.
satire, right? It absolutely invests everybody into it in ways that I think are really compelling.
The freshness of the comedy is really the trick, right? Because it's so often funny when you find it, like you're saying, and then you rehearse and rehearse and rehearse and rehearse and rehearse, and actors just start going through the movements, and then you finally get an audience and try to remember that first thing. Were there things that changed a lot in the preview process, or things you found that you thought were one thing in rehearsal and then saw and said, oh, wait, wow, that's not... Has it been a really active... time for you?
It has. It's been very active. I mean, audience feedback is huge for me, and not what people come up and say afterwards, although that's nice too, but just feeling where they're into it, where they're losing it, and I've actually been surprised in how long the play is funny. I thought the play was funny until a certain point, and then it got not funny, but people seem to still be able to laugh at it all the way through, pretty much, which surprised the heck out of me and the actors. I mean, and there are some things that they do where they really kind of go out on a limb, and I feel like just getting the feedback from the audience that they're there with them was really satisfying to us, because there's a lot of like kind of dangerous, risky, personal stuff up there, and so getting that feedback was really helpful. We also changed the way in which we approached the ending of the play several times during the process, and we kind of knew that we were all sort of armed for that. But you know, the suspense of the play that we've all referred to meant that we had to walk a fine line, that we really had to figure out what that line was. If we were tipping our hand too much in one way and showing people what was going to happen next, or if we weren't enough and really holding back too much, just to keep that line of suspense really interested was it took some finagling, in particular with technical elements, figuring out the sound design and how extreme the light design was and where those things went. Was we made lots of changes, actually.
Yeah, and so you're mentioning the shifting from the funny and also the dangerous, risky stuff going on. So let's talk about that too. You know, the vulnerability that's up there on stage, and the choices that, I mean, thinking about the choices you and the actors made, but also then the choices these characters are making in the course of the play are really risky and potentially dangerous. Yeah.
Well, and this is one of the things that, you know, going back to sort of how we're representing this young woman on stage, I think Jenny Manis, the costume designer, and I worked really hard on what exactly her costume was going to be, because what David Ives calls for is, like, basically she walks in and takes off her coat and she's wearing leather lingerie and a dog collar. And you're like, okay, what is that going to look like, and what is that going to be, and what are the steps going to be, and how... You know, there's this major question in this play of, like, how much skin do you end up seeing on this young woman, and I've seen production photographs from, you know, productions all over the country and actually all over the world, since this play is being produced kind of everywhere, and just seeing what those choices were was kind of fascinating to me, about, you know, because it's something I grapple with a lot, which is having to, I said this to Amanda, like, it's really hard for me to objectify Amanda, to make a point about objectifying Amanda. But that's the point that we're making, and that's the way the play does it. So we tried to, you know, really, really detail exactly what those steps were, and, you know, and then she's been very sort of great and game, and she feels very empowered, actually, in her underwear. She's like, everyone's so worried about me. It makes me feel so powerful. My mom was worried that she was cold. I assured her the stage lights were very warm. you know, there's definitely a lot of those sorts of decisions that we had to make, and I forget where I was going with this, but
that's one of the risks, right?
Yeah, that's a big
Yeah.
risk for her, is that she's running around in her underwear from a great deal of the play. And you know, they had to get in some pretty provocative positions together, and that was definitely they met on the first day of rehearsal. So getting to that place, I had to take a great deal of comfort and trust in each other, and ultimately I think trust in me, that I was like, you guys look great from out here. You know, just them knowing that.
You were keeping an eye and sort of,
Yeah. But you know, actors, I think, are so heroic in the way that they just are able to be vulnerable at the drop of a hat. I think it's a remarkable thing that, especially when you think about how they have to audition all the time and face rejection all the time, that they're also people who are so willing to walk into a room and open themselves up to a place where they can cry, which is kind of amazing, and love each other. I mean, they have to love each other every night, and they have to hate each other every night, and they have to go through all of those phases of it for real every single performance. So it's kind of amazing.
Thinking about that personal exposure. I mean, you're talking about the clothes coming off, but also just the emotional exposure going on up there, of just that, the openness that they are both exhibiting in different parts. And I this is not a spoiler, but a moment in the play of the coffee, the offer of the coffee, which is one of my favorite moments, you know, where I felt like, oh, we're really on a ride. You know, that just seemed like the play world really opened up for me in that moment. And it was something about the pacing, the timing that you found, the openness that those actors approach that moment with, you know, and then it just kind of kicks in this whole other way. There's a lot of that willingness to just offer. Yeah. I think it's an amazingly difficult task that they have in front of them, all actors, but these two in this show in particular. We've talked a lot about the popularity of the play, and Koya, you were saying earlier about how people see themselves in it, that we're constantly auditioning out in the world, you know, and proving ourselves and first impressions and all of that. Do you have other thoughts about why you've been hearing a lot of audience responses through previews, and we have both seen it and connected with people afterwards? You know, what are some of the compelling things about this play that it's just like wildfire getting produced all over the place? What do you two think about that?
I think that's a really interesting question, because, I mean, I think that there's something about the subject matter that seems to be in the air. As I said to you ladies earlier, you know, the 50 Shades of Grey is like this really big book right now, and everybody's reading it. I haven't read it, but 100 million copies sold of it. So there's some interest in power dynamics, I think, out there in these kinds of relationships. So I think that's one thing. I also think that, you know, the thing Koya said earlier about how relatable these people are just as people, I feel like I recognize them out of my life too. I guess also just that it's funny, and that it brings up things that we don't talk about much, you know, in sexual politics between us. But I think also, really, for me, the interesting question is about like gender dynamics in the play. I think for me that's the exciting thing.
I mean, I'll be honest. I didn't plan to like this play. I came into it thinking I was not going to like it, precisely because I so rarely enjoy the plays that pop up frequently. They're kind of the most of the work I do is community engaged theater, or theater that deals with race, or hip hop theater. And so, you know, everything I was hearing about Venus and Fur, I remember reading the review of it in New York Magazine and being like, oh, great, that's going to be the next play. I don't know why it's so crabby all the time about everything. And so even to this, I'm like, yeah, sure, you know, like I like both of them. So it's like, that'll be fun to talk to them. I'll do this. But I really, really enjoyed the play. It gave me a headache in ways that I think are really productive, that I find myself all the time kind of going back and forth about what I feel about it, what I think about it, what I believe is going on, what is this play about, and I really cannot answer those questions for myself. And I would say that that's unusual for me. Usually I see a play and I'm like, I did not like it because of this, period. Or, I loved it, it's about this. And this one, I enjoyed it because it is so well crafted, it is so well directed, well acted, and also very confusing. I mean, it's very problematic in some ways, but also very interesting. That's a very useless word to grapple with what the play does. And I don't even know if it's about the question of gender. I mean, it is about sort of this question of fantasy, but I think it's more about power struggle that everyone can relate to, and sort of who gets to win, as you say, or who has the final say, or what happens the next day.
Yeah, I actually think that you're right about that it's not necessarily, I mean, a lot of it is about gender dynamics, but I think I might be limiting it too much when I say that, because it is sort of like a larger power struggle, but I think that what's so exciting about this play is that it's and this, and I swear to God, this isn't a sales pitch for the play, because you guys are going anyway. But that it's an hour and a half long, and it's fun and it's funny, and then it leaves you with something to really go talk about, and you have plenty of time to go to the bar and talk about it when the play's over. Because I mean, I'm still having great conversations around this play. I mean, with you guys too. Like it is definitely a conversation piece. We were having a tech meeting after first or second preview, and this woman, there wasn't a talk back that night, but this woman just really wanted to talk to us about what does this play mean. And I was like, I'm just really glad that to be part of a project that actually makes people want to go talk about these sorts of issues, you know, that there are within the play really specifically like issues of class and sex and power and all these sorts of things, education level, all these assumptions we make about each other, and the way they play out between just two people. And I think that from that little microcosm of these two people, it gives us like a wealth of things to go like contemplate, because who does win this play? Because, you know, when you have a power struggle, there's an assumption that there's a power struggle because someone has to win. And that's why I think it's such a great question, that who wins this play, or does anybody win, or do they both win, or...
And that's the debate you could keep having. You know, I think I feel so attracted to plays where characters really go for what they want, you know, where you see people just really go for it, like ask for it, really do the work. And you see that in this play, like two people working really hard to get at something, even if it's not quite clear what they're going for or who's working harder at any given moment. It's like they're working really hard. And to not know exactly what the outcome is fascinating, you know, that it almost feels like I could imagine 5 different endings beyond, in the 5 minutes beyond the ending that I see on stage, you know, and that's really exciting.
Yeah, and you know, it is a play that is so fraught with choices that you have to make about sort of, I loved what you said about we're going to objectify her to make a point about how she's being objectified. That's a kind of paradox that's hard to grapple with. And yet, even though this actress, I think, spoiler alert, but spends most of the play in her underwear, that's fair to say, right? It is a part that I think any actress would kill for. I mean, it is one of the most complicated full parts, you know, and it's a play where both of the characters are kind of very full people. And that's not always the case in a play, you know. Often I find in plays women are kind of ciphers, you know, we don't know much about them. This is a play where we don't know much about that character, but that is on purpose. You know, she is... I'm scared. I'm scared to tell you guys something, but we don't know much about her in a way that is very productive.
Absolutely.
You can tell the playwright meant for that, just not that the playwright didn't know how to write a woman, which is sometimes how I feel when I see the play.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, now my crabby is coming out.
She reveals. Yeah, right. We waited for that. She's revealed very strategically.
Yeah.
Right? Or withheld very strategically. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that might be a good place for us to kind of open it up and hear what other questions or comments might be in the room and coming in from elsewhere. So we're going to ask, because this is being recorded, if you can come to the mic. We see a couple of hands.
I have a three-part question. They're all related together. One, why do you think Robert Falls chose and thought that a woman should direct it?
Mm-hmm.
Two, was it a very interesting experience when there were only three of you, really, two actors and a director?
Mm-hmm.
And three, what effect do you think it had compared to other productions that, in fact, you were a woman directing it?
Great.
Those are great questions. Mostly a lot of men have directed this play, and I've seen some productions here and there that women have directed. I'm not going to say like I'm the only woman to direct this play, but I think that what Bob was being sensitive to was the treatment of the woman in this play. I think that he said that to me, but I also think that he knows me, and he also just kind of knew I would really connect with this play. And I was really, at some point in the rehearsal process, I was talking about it with the actors, and Amanda said to me, "You know what? I am really glad some days, most days, that with some of the things that you're asking me to do, that it's you asking me and not some guy." Because I did have to ask her to do some things where I'd be like, maybe you should open your legs here and do these sorts of things. And it feels really sensitive. And she was always pretty comfortable and thankful that was me doing that. Especially since I so openly grapple with that. And I'm like, I'm so sorry. Okay, so that was part one. Part two was, remind me?
Just the three of you in the room, right?
Yeah, some of those days were super weird. I mean, there's always two stage managers in the room and an assistant director, so there's really 6 of us in the room, and then on and off literary staff. But it really did feel like just the 3 of us, and just them doing stuff and me watching and all up in their face. And it got pretty intense during parts of the rehearsal process of just like me and Rufus and Amanda, and me and Rufus and Amanda talking to each other and staring at each other and like all day long. So yeah, I mean, it was a very intense 3-way relationship that we have, which is odd and kind of great. And as for the third part of your question, I guess I think / hope that some of my own inner conflict with the play can actually be seen in some of my direction of it. Like, I do think that there's a way in which I can really only speak for my own production, but I think that the play is clearly very complicated in my production. And I think that's because my feelings about the play are clearly very complicated. And while our production still succeeds, I think, in being very funny and sexy and all the things that Venus and Furs is supposed to be, I'm also very grateful for the fact that what we've come up with is also the weight and seriousness of it is clearly does actually come through. And when you leave the theater, you'll be thinking about these issues, because I think you can see that I have.
I think it's very important that somebody who is thinking about gender and gender politics on a daily basis direct this play. I don't know that that has to be a woman, but women certainly have to grapple with that every day. You know, and I think because the play itself, as a text, as a script, with no director messing with it, no actors interpreting it, may or may not be a quote-unquote feminist play. Who knows? It could land on a lot of sides. It's complicated. In some hands, it might really become a play about a female fantasy, period, right, versus grappling with it. And so to have a director that's thinking about that, I think is very important.
And I really consider my work as a director an ongoing conversation with the playwright. And while actually I've never talked to David Ives, I feel like I've had a lot of conversations with him in my head, and that just the act of my trying to put his words up into action is a conversation, and it's a conversation that I like to have some conflict in too. That I don't just blindly love a play. I really try to get in there and see what its guts really are.
That's great. Were you going to ask them?
I had two questions. The first one was, is the Thomas Novacek play, is that a real play, or is that just a fiction within this play?
Well, his play is based on Leopold von Sacher-Masoch's book.
So it is a real play outside of this play?
Yes, in a way. So when David Ives did his adaptation, the first thing he did was he wanted to adapt Venus in Furs, Sacher-Masoch's book, and he did a straight up adaptation of it. He did the entire book, and then he sent it to a friend of his who ended up directing this play, and he was like, it doesn't really work. So then he said he took the play back and he kind of gutted it, and he made it just really the most action-filled parts, and he cut some characters, and then he kind of wrote the play around it, and he said the play kind of unfolded within 10 days from there. That once he started writing Vanda and Thomas, the actor and director, that then he just found a way to like interweave the adaptation that he'd already created.
Okay. And my second question is, I really enjoyed a lot of your productions that you've directed at smaller theaters.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel that your staging of this play is different, or is it any different being able to produce it at a theater like the Goodman with a lot of resources, and outside of the additional casting opportunities that it afforded you, and probably additional rehearsal time? Do you feel that you staged the play any differently than you would have if, than say you had staged it at Steep or something like that?
That's a really good question. There's something really like exciting and daunting about, you now have this giant stage, and also there's only two people in the play. So, it's a double thing, because the play is actually a really intimate play. So one of my biggest fears when they hired me for it was, oh my goodness, I'm in the Albert. This is so exciting, but the play is just these two people in this one room. There's no scene changes in this play, so there's not even in some ways, the play doesn't even need this sort of big stage. So one of the first things we had to do was really come up with a scenic design that created an intimacy. And I joke that, it's my first time on a big stage, and yet I've made it a really small stage. We're using about a quarter of the Albert stage. And so there's certainly things like that. And luckily I had a fellowship at the Goodman, so I assisted Bob Falls, and I did a piece in New Stages Amplified, so I had some familiarity with the inner workings of how an institution like this works, which is really different than Steep, and just how you navigate your everyday rehearsal life and how the tech process works and all those things. It's slightly different in ways that I think would be unexpected if I hadn't done that before. But I do think ultimately my direction of the play would be really similar at Steep. There's a way in which, this play is a little. I actually think this play, although it's two people, is a little too big for a really small stage. But I think some of the ways in which I just tried to really approach the actors with a want for there to be a lot of truth in the play between the two of them, and yet. I'm always really interested in also like having a visual expression of that, even at Steep in some of my plays. I think we've achieved that. So, it is on a larger scale, and I was given a lot more tools to play with, but it's been a lot of fun for me to go from, and my next show is at Steep. I'll be back in a 50-seat house, going from 900 seats to 50. That'll be an interesting going back. Yeah, I hope that answers. Yeah.
Are there any other questions out here? Yeah.
When you were given the script and you began to read it, are you the director who visualizes everything and has it blocked in advance
Mm-hmm.
by the time you get to the first read-through, and you know pretty much where things are going to go? Or are you like a director that was described to me when I was in graduate school years ago? The director's job is to make the coffee and let the people work the things out.
I think I am somewhere in between those two people. I'm not allowed to make the coffee because I mess it up. I proved that during tech. I also don't have the whole thing visualized and blocked. What I do is I do a great deal of text analysis. I have a lot of ideas of ways in which it might go. I've read it a million times, and I have lots of thoughts and opinions. And we've created the set design, so I know kind of what a bunch of the options of where people might be are. But I also really think that collaborating with actors is a really, really, really important thing for any director to do, because they're ultimately the ones that have to do the play, and they're ultimately the ones who end up knowing more about the play than I do, hopefully, by the time we get to this stage, which they definitely do at this point. And so, yeah, I mean, I visualize parts of it. I'm very auditory. I can hear a lot of what the play sounds like before I can see it. I was very, very eager to get them cast, and was very excited when finally I had a cast, because then I could start to picture it. I find it incredibly difficult to picture a play until I know who's in it. And then I can start hearing their voices and kind of seeing them move through it a little. But most of the work is just in preparation to hit the ground running and just be full of all the information and ideas I possibly can be for first rehearsal. And then I let them bring themselves and their work to me as well. You know, it's really similar and kind of interesting in a way to all this stuff we've been talking about power sharing and in the Soccer Massic book, there's this outer book and there's an inner book, kind of like this play. And in the beginning, there's this unnamed narrator who falls asleep reading Hegel, and so I started getting into a little bit of that and the master-slave dynamic, and that has a lot to do with the power sharing that we've been talking about. But I think it's also really similar to directing and acting in that the philosophy states that in a master-slave relationship, that the master starts out having all the power, but actually becomes so dependent on the slave that the slave actually ends up having all the power. And it's really sort of interesting in the context of this play, and actually in the context of being a director, in which, you know, you start out having all the, like, I know everything and you guys go stand there, and then pretty soon the play becomes this breathing thing that you kind of have to go, oh, okay, I have to figure out what you're doing now and fit myself into that, because it shifts.
Great. Looks like maybe we have one more question.
So we actually have a question from the live stream, someone who's watching the live stream who saw the play last night and was asking about Thomas's choice to stay, and if you could talk a little bit more about why he decides to let Vanda audition, and maybe what makes him decide to let her audition.
Oh, interesting. Thomas, why does Thomas let her stay to audition? Well, she's really pretty. And she's kind of a force. She just won't take no for an answer. He says no like a lot of different times in a lot of different ways, and she just is like, she just keeps coming back with, no, I want to stay. Come on, please. And she asks him to stay in so many different ways. I think that finally she kind of wears him down a little bit.
She doesn't really give him the option to say no.
No, she doesn't. She doesn't. And then once his fiance calls and she takes the chance to get in the dress, he's like, fine. It's actually going to be faster to read you and get you out the door than to not read you.
He seems resigned, right? Like, that's the way I'm going to move through. I gotta do this, and then I'll get you moving.
Yeah. He definitely... He's worn out. She wears him out.
She's strategic. She knows what she's doing.
Yeah.
In that first moment.
And that all happens in the first 10 minutes, so it's not giving anything away, but
Good.
it's an interesting question.
And that's a great place for us to end, to start
Great.
kicking off and setting you all up to go and enjoy your afternoon at the theater. Joanie, congratulations on a great production.
Thank
Thanks so much
you.
for taking the time to talk with it. Koya, thanks for being here too. Thanks to all of you for coming in and meeting with us. It's really great to have this time to talk about the play.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Thank you guys.